Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, loyal listeners to Business Innovators Radio. This is Andy Curry, your host. Today, I'm excited to have with me Kay Sever. Kay has been speaking professionally since the year 2000, and her content is concepts on barriers to profit maximization. That sounds really deep to me, and we're going to get into that here in just a moment. Kay speaks in the U.S., but she also speaks internationally via the internet. She resides out of Arizona, and Kay has written 3 books, and she's also written approximately 60 articles for business publications. Kay, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Andy. It's great to be here.
Well, we're really excited to have you, Kay. So let's start off by having you tell us about your speaking business, the people you speak to, and what kind of goes on.
I'd love to do that. My main audience are management teams. The product and the service and the size of company really are irrelevant because management's challenges are the same regardless of those issues. There's the same kinds of decisions made, the same kinds of things that are measured, the same credibility issues, and the same challenges with change. And so when I speak, I bring to light many of the hidden challenges, the hidden barriers that management teams often don't realize that they even are facing because of the traditional ways we've managed worldwide for decades.
I'm really interested to get into that and find out what some of those are. But before we do, tell us how you got started in the speaking business.
Well, 15 years ago, my first professional speaking engagement was actually to a national women's convention. It was a business convention held here in Scottsdale. And those women were able to find me through my professional network and asked me to speak to them, and I was off and running.
Okay. And when your first speaking gig happened, how did you do?
Well, I got absolutely great reviews. In fact, one of the women who organized the event was a vice president in a major corporation here in the U.S., and she wrote me a glowing reference letter, and even we continued to correspond via email. 18 months later, she told me that her people were still talking about some of the things that I shared with them that day.
Well, that had to feel good.
Absolutely.
So I'll bet as far as speaking goes, you were hooked that day.
Yes, really. My intent is to bring value to people and to bring new insights that allow them to make change very quickly.
Okay, now some of the listeners are going to say, well, what qualifies you to talk on that? So what do you say to that?
I have a unique background in business. I've had the opportunity in a Fortune 500 company almost 20 years ago to actually help create a methodology for change that accelerates change and empowers management to maximize profit in a way that, to be honest, at the moment that I was involved in all that, I knew we were really successful, and I knew that what we were doing with our change methodology was contributing to that. But 15 years later in my consulting career, looking back on that, I've really done a lot of work in analyzing what was the core root of our success. And so I believe that I understand more about management choices and management insights, and how if management are given new insights about what's possible to achieve, their role in change, and really what is possible to change more quickly than they can imagine, amazing things happen in companies. And so I share those insights, and I tell stories, and I give analogies, even about the Indianapolis 500 and racing, and how that is linked directly to the speed of change in corporations.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. You know, your content is concepts on barriers to profit maximization. So talk more about that.
Companies make money based on what they see on the general ledger, and they make decisions based on what they see on the general ledger. The general ledger contains the dollars for the product they sold, how much they paid their people, what it cost them to produce their product, and also for problems that they needed to spend money to fix. Now, what is not on the general ledger are dollars for what could have happened but didn't. And it is actually possible to calculate the dollars that are missing from a business from the revenue side, and also possible to carve out the dollars that were spent on problems that could have been avoided. Because of the way the ledger is structured and has always been structured, those dollars that are on the ledger for excess cost are buried in ways that management often never sees, and the revenue side that they're missing, they never see because there's nothing recorded. And so what I do is help companies understand their general ledger footprint and how it compares to earnings capacity. And by seeing the difference in those two, then they can discover where their hidden losses are, calculate those losses, connect them back to organizational problems, and the way people are working together in a company, and actually link profit to culture. So that's what I do.
Interesting. Now, I know enough about general ledgers to where, they categorize expenses via wages, depreciation, that kind of thing.
Correct.
So for missed opportunities, are you adding more categories to help define and see that? Is that what you're doing?
No, we don't add anything to the general ledger. Instead, we start by looking at what's not working in the business. And it is possible, if I meet with a management team for the first time, one of the first things I'll ask them as an exercise is, let's take 2 or 3 minutes, and I'd like for you to write down the top 3 problems you deal with on a daily basis. People can make that list in 30 seconds.
I'll bet. And
we start there. And we say, okay, well, let's see if we can put dollars to these problems. And I teach them how to do that. And as soon as we do that, we can actually do something that I call surgical cost reduction. That instead of issuing an edict for 10 or 20% cost reduction all across the board, the smart and most common sense way and most effective way to permanently reduce costs is to take a surgical approach where we carve out the dollars that could have been avoided if our people would have interacted differently, communicated differently, perhaps had a different insight about the business or a different insight about their capability or capacity to do something different than what they've always done. And so really you can cherry pick these things. You can actually, once you've got the dollars attached to problems, you can rank them, and now you know the top 3 to 5 things that are costing me the most money. And now it's up to management to actually make a decision, a new choice to say, are we willing to change what we do to capture these dollars? It costs no money. There's no investment required, no millions of dollars in capital required to do this. And it is an area that almost no one understands that is out there. So in the past 3 years, I've actually developed a management training program I call Third Stage Management that teaches management teams how to do this. And even from day one, people walk away with new questions to ask, new problems to solve. It's very exciting work.
I'll bet it is. My question to you is, you get up in the morning, you're steeped in your habits, you get your coffee, you run out there, you go to work, you go to, you do your thing all day, you come home, and repeat and repeat. So people sort of don't stand back and say, hey, I need to work on my business, not just in it. And so what you're doing is getting them to look at their business to work on it. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, and actually I'm glad you brought that example up. In my book that I wrote back in 2008, it is about the barriers to change, the steal profit and prevent change. And one of the things that I talk about in there is the acceptance of the way things are, the acceptance of the status quo. And when things go on long enough, because management doesn't choose the proper reaction when a problem does occur and does arise, pretty soon people all over the company believe that change will not happen. And they accept where they are. And as soon as they do that, I can tell you, guarantee you that hidden losses will occur and will continue to occur for years. And so I help them see that the choices they're making are attached to real dollars that are not directly attached to the production process, and that they can make more money by interacting differently and by communicating differently within the management team and with the workforce.
Now, can you give us a quick example of that? And of course, not mentioning a company, but maybe the type of business, to give listeners an example of what you did to help them get that money back and solve the troubles and such.
Yes, I've got a great example. I just shared this example with a conference in Perth, Australia 2 weeks ago. This example involves departments that are in every company that produces product: operations, maintenance, procurement, and engineering. And in this example, procurement had been given an edict to lower costs as much as possible. And so they began seeking out lowest cost vendors to buy their supplies, their maintenance parts, those kinds of things for the company. They bought a $100 hose, the cheapest one they can find, for a major piece of production equipment. And the operation that I was actually helping had 16 of these units on site. And this particular plant where these units existed happened to be the bottleneck, which even made this decision worse. It turned out that these hoses were failing daily. And usually one of the 16 units was down every day. What we did was analyze the annual impact of that lost time, plus the expense on the expense side of paying people, perhaps overtime even, that wouldn't have been incurred to fix the problem, hydraulic fluid that was lost that wouldn't have been lost, hose replacement, plus the downtime. To save $100 on a hose, that company lost $4.5 million that year.
Oh, my goodness sake.
And there was no recognition, because there was such a heavy focus on cost reduction, that procurement was rewarded for a few $1,000s in savings over a course of a year. And because that profit that was lost was never on the general ledger in the first place, no one had any recognition that that kind of loss was attached to that decision. There was nothing intentional done. No one ever intended to create that kind of loss. But because people don't know how to do these calculations, there's no recognition.
So how do you get people to do that? You just say, okay, you assign somebody the problem looker-upper and say, go find them?
Well, actually, I do it at the management team level. And I was working with management, and I just began asking questions because I know where to start with the process. Mm-hmm. And so this problem was one of those that was written down by somebody in the room. And so we said, well, let's take this one and let's just put dollars to it and see what we come up with. And people were just shocked. And I often find millions of dollars that people just don't know. In my very first consulting assignment, I was working in Canada. First meeting with the management team, asked questions about assumptions in the budget, and discovered a $17 million loss annually that they did not know that they were incurring.
Well, I hope you got a little fee, a little percentage fee out of that.
Well, I don't charge my fee based on what's out there to get. But anyway, it was very insightful, and what that did was help them begin asking more questions, more of these kind of questions, so that even more money was discovered.
Well, that must be hugely rewarding for you.
It is. I can't tell you how. It is just, because, like I say, it permanently changes what people believe about their business, and it opens doors to profit that really can't be opened any other way until you start looking at what you're missing.
Now, is this primarily for bigger businesses or even mom and pops?
Actually, this concept applies to everyone who has any kind of management authority because, like I say, there are core functional areas that exist in every management system. And if we're not looking at our business in a way that allows those functional groups to operate with one mindset so that they're all working together to reduce these losses once they understand what they are and why they're happening, then it's not possible to get them. So once the dollars are identified, then it's a matter of people understanding what they have to do differently in problem solving, in communication, in strategizing, in setting budget goals, the things they need to look at differently in their company to come together in a new way.
Fascinating, fascinating. Okay, I think our time is about up. So what I want to know, Kay, is how people can get a hold of you. First of all, what is your website?
thirdstagemanagement.com.
And is it spelled third, or is it the number 3 with an RD?
That's 3RD. It's actually named after the Saturn V rocket. Believe it or not, when I speak, I have a huge replica of the Saturn V that I take to speaking engagements. And I talk about the power of the third stage because it was the third stage that allowed our astronauts to escape gravity and go to the moon. And before that rocket was designed, we had no way to escape. And so third stage management is about escaping barriers to achieve all that's possible.
Okay, now I want to warn listeners that management is not spelled out. It's actually MGMT. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's 3rdstageMGMT.com.
Okay. Now, do you want to give out a phone number, or do you want them to go to the website?
No, I'd love to. They can reach me on my office number, 480-545-9095, or my cell, 480-223-2230.
Well, fantastic, Kay. Thank you so much for giving us some insight into your business. That was fascinating information, and I do hope people take advantage of your knowledge.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.